Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to talk on one of the most interesting topics. Friends, our topic of discussion is teaching global language in multilingual country. And for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Renu Tomar. Dr. Renu Tomar is Assistant Professor in Guru Gobind Singh IP University. Dr. Tomar has almost 17 years of experience both in teaching as well as in academic administration. Dr. Renu Tomar is a prolific professor, I would say, and we are going to get in-depth knowledge through her on today's topic, that is teaching global language in multilingual country. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Renu Tomar, and let's try to understand the topic in detail. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Hello Geetika, thanks a lot. As Geetika has already told you that in today's session we are going to talk about teaching of global language in multilingual country. Multilingual country, that is our India. Global language, that is English. Now the question is that why do we have to study English in India? So through today's topic we will try to examine importance of English. We will also try to examine what is the role of learner and environment in teaching of English. Apart from that, we should also try to examine various English language skills, that is listening, speaking, reading and writing. Now to come down to the first question which all of us have in mind, why do we need to study English or why do we need to learn English? I would like to replace the word study from learning. Why do we learn to learn? Why do we need to learn English? We need to learn English because it is a global language, one thing. By global language, we mean that it is a language of present market. By global language, we mean that it is the third most spoken language in the globe after Mandarin and Spanish. From Indian perspective, we can say that English is perceived as language of elite. It may not be a fact, but it is perceived in the same manner. After FDI approval, after the liberalization of economy, it has been seen that English language became very important from the market point of view. As it became very important from the market point of view, it has become a kind of a need of the day for our children to learn so that they can have a standing in the international market, as they need a language to communicate internationally. Otherwise, in a multilingual country, as I said, that this is a global language and ours is a multilingual country. So after independence, we have accepted India in a 3-language formula. Having accepted India in a 3-language formula means that it is the second language or a compulsory third language as per the education system. Why is it so? It is because it is associate official language, particularly for the states which are non-Hindi speaking. Being an associate official language, English language becomes more important. It is a language of higher education. All the scientific development, all the technological development, all the researches, they are usually, the material for them are available in English, not in the vernacular language. This also increases the importance of English. It is the language of reason. It is the language which imports knowledge, information, facts from other countries. It is the library language, particularly for the higher education. English has been accepted as most important language in Indian scenario. It is window to our world, our international world. Therefore, there is a need to guarantee that our children achieve a respectable level of competence in speaking English without replacing their mother tongue. So that means learning English doesn't mean that we have to replace our mother tongue. Another question which usually comes to our mind, that English is a foreign language, why we should learn it? Now let us try to evaluate and analyze the fact that whether English is a foreign language or it is a second language. There is no doubt to the fact that since British Raj, English has gained domination, status and privilege. In pre-independence, it was very much a foreign language because it was the language of colonizer. How did it come into being? English language was introduced through modern Indian education system of Macaulay. It came into being as a result of 1854 Wood Dispatch, which is often known as Magna Carta of education, Indian education system. When Macaulay studied Indian education system, he had to find out a way, he had to develop a new education system for India so that it could provide administrative officers, clerk for the task of ruling the vast subcontinent that is India. For that reason, Macaulay came out with the policy of modern Indian language in English medium, which came into being through Wood Dispatch of 1854. After it came into being, India education system more or less was controlled by English language. But even the Britishers did not try to replace vernacular language with English medium. So we can say that English became a kind of a second language in India along with the vernacular language. In pre-independence India, it was a foreign language, but presently it is a second language. How do we define a foreign language? Foreign language is the language which is learned by the learner to speak in the area, to use in the area where it is not spoken. Second language is the language which is learned by the learner to use in the area where it is used. Now the question is, in our society, in our nation, is English used by the common man? The answer is yes. So that makes English language a second language. To further go into the detail, when you go to some school, you fill up the form and there is an option for foreign language. When we come down to the foreign language, there is an option like French, German, Spanish, but we have no option for English because English is not considered as per the Indian education system a foreign language, it is a second language. To further emphasize how important English is presently for society at large, not Indian education system but society at large, let us put some questions to ourselves. Which language do we use when we go to the restaurant? Which language do we use when we go for shopping? Which is the language which is used in offices? The answer to all these questions will help us to provide or emphasize importance of English in the present Indian scenario. So we can say that English is a language which has a socio-economic importance attached to it. We cannot give up on English. Now the question is that how to teach English. We have to understand that while studying English or while teaching English, there are two important factors which have to be kept in mind of the learning situation, which is learning situation and the learner. By learning situation, what I mean is the environment. By the learner, I mean that individual or personal factors of the learner. Environment. When we talk about environment, there is acquisition rich environment and there is acquisition poor environment. What is acquisition rich environment? Acquisition rich environment means that learner has access to English in the place where apart from the classroom. That means the learner is able to use English with his peer group. The learner is able to use English at home and he has access to the English language. This here we are talking about the urban middle class people and urban middle upper class people. The children over there, the learner over there do have access to the movies, do have access to English documentaries, do have access to English books and at times even parents speak in English. This is the acquisition rich environment. What about the acquisition poor environment? Acquisition poor environment is the environment where the learner has access to English language only in the classroom. When he goes out of the classroom, he doesn't have access to English language, neither in his peer group nor back at home. So, the teacher has to realize that as per the environment of the learner, he or she has to develop the education scenario, that is educational situation, educational material and teaching learning process. It should be suiting to the fact that what kind of environment the learner comes from. For example, if a learner is coming from acquisition poor environment, then we can introduce them through the topic like cooking, preparation of tea. That would be the topics which the learner would be able to associate with. He wouldn't be able to associate with going on some air trip, going to some foreign land. So, accordingly, the teacher has to design and decide the learning process as well as the learning material which suits the learner. Apart from acquisition rich environment, there is one more thing which we need to learn, that English education learning has two situations associated to it: informal language learning and formal language learning. What is informal language learning? Informal language learning is usually which begins from the birth. That means the learner has exposure and access to English language when he is born. It begins from the birth and it is acquired from parents. Usually parents are the people who would be correcting him, correcting the errors as well as motivating him. Parents would be the people who would be providing him learning material. This kind of a learning usually begins with speaking, with listening and speaking. And most of the time the orientation is around listening and speaking. Here we don't have any kind of a structured learning methodology which is adopted by the adults back at home. Learner learn to speak English just as he learns to speak his mother tongue. In informal language learning situation, the learner is usually exposed to English language with the help of media and by the people around him. While informal language learning would begin when the learner would enter the school system. It may be from the nursery or first in an English medium school or class 6th in the vernacular medium school. It is more structured in the approach and the adult over here who is correcting the error as well as guiding the learner is the teacher. In the formal language learning situation, the learner is exposed as well as practices language with the help and in presence of the teacher, who is going to correct the errors as well. At times, correcting the error is punitive in nature in case of formal language learning. And of course, the most important, the formal language learning usually ends with a certification. And informal language learning is learning for learning's sake, for progression, for personality development and other factors associated with it. In case of formal language learning, usually we emphasize upon formal grammar and formal structure. In informal language, we are not so much concerned about the grammatical exposure, we are not so much concerned about the structured approach to the learning. So, in formal language learning, the exposure is to the written form, and in informal language learning, the exposure is usually to the spoken form. Apart from the environment, there is another factor which is important in English language learning, which is learner factor. Learner is not like a sponge that we keep him in an environment and he would be able to take whatever is around. Learner has his or her own individual traits which the teacher has to understand and know. Those individual traits are generally deciding factor in learning process, and they have to be understood by the teacher so that the learning remains good, and apart from that the learning is effective. So, these factors which we need to understand, the first factor is age. There are researches with relation to the age which have proven that children are better at learning language in comparison to the adults. Vice versa, we have researches which prove that adults were able to learn language at a better pace than children. But one thing was always missing in the case of adults which the children picks very easily, that is pronunciation. So, no doubt about the fact that sooner we introduce learning of English to the learner, better it is. Then gender, the researchers have proven that women are better than men as far as language learning is concerned, because they have better verbal ability. When we come down to the intelligence, which is third most important factor in the case of learning a language, intelligence can be defined as reasoning ability, verbal ability and concept formation ability. Here today we are only talking about verbal ability because we are talking about the language. It has been seen that people do have better verbal ability or poor verbal ability, and accordingly teacher has to design the learning of the language. How do we find out what is the verbal ability of the learner? Through tests which are available like Army Alpha test, Army Beta test, and there are other tests also which provide you which would be able to provide the teacher the intelligence level or the verbal ability level of the learner, so that the teacher can accordingly define and decide the teaching learning process and the teaching learning material. Apart from intelligence, there is aptitude of the learner. What is aptitude? Aptitude, to define in a layman language, is knack for language. It has been seen that there are people who have knack for languages. There are people who would be able to understand, or he would be able to learn many languages easily. This can be easily known by the teacher in her classroom, After getting to know that whether the learner has knack of the language or not, we can further find out the ways so that the language learning becomes, the pace of language learning can be defined. The aptitude can be found by, again, the test, which are the psychological tests which are available, like the thematic aptitude test. Thematic aptitude test would be able to help the teacher to find out whether the learner has aptitude for the language or not. Cognitive style of thinking. What is cognitive style of thinking? It is individual way to organize one's universe and reflect on one's personality. I will repeat again. It is individual's way to organize one's universe and reflect one's personality, preference or ability or intelligence. For example, we have Ram and Ramesh. Both Ram and Ramesh are shown a new car. Ram may be more interested in understanding the engine of the car, and Ramesh may be more interested in understanding the interiors of the car, its comfort. So, this is the cognitive style of thinking of Ram and Ramesh. Every individual has different way to reflect on the issues. So, accordingly we have to understand that what kind of situation and what kind of learning environment we should be providing to the learner which suits his cognitive style of thinking. Now to talk about personality. What is personality? How do we define personality? Personality in the context of learning of language. It has been found through researches that introversion, soberness and self-sufficiency are the factors which are directly related to the verbal competency. So, after having found personality by again the test which can be given to the learner, we can decide that how language should be taught to the learner and to what level. Apart from that, we can also define or understand what to expect. The expectation of a teacher can also be decided by understanding the personality of the learner. Now let us talk about attitude. What is attitude? How do we define attitude? Can the attitude be changed? Attitude means belief, opinion and achievement. Usually belief, opinion are decided by the achievement level, the satisfaction level of the learner, his upbringing, the regional background from which he is coming. All these factors help in forming the attitude of the learner. English language will be governed by the attitude of the learner, which is usually decided by his achievement and satisfaction level with context of his performance in English language. That means if we are able to work upon satisfaction level of the learner, if we are able to bring his achievement level with respect to English language, then the positive attitude can be imbibed in the learner. This also brings us to the fact that teacher has to take care of the fact that nowhere in her evaluation the teacher should be punitive or negative in her approach. She should be positive, she should be appreciative, and the mistake should be pointed out in very sublime manner. Otherwise, the attitude of the learner would become negative, not towards the teacher but towards that language itself. Now let us talk about the motivation. What is motivation? Motivation with context with respect to English can be divided in integrative and instrumental. A learner may like to learn English because he is motivated integratively, intrinsic motivation, or his motivation might be just instrumental. Integrative motivation means that learner wants to learn the English because he wants to improve his personality. He wants to learn or read the literature in that particular language. He wants to know about the culture of the people who speak that language. So, these would be all covered under integrative motivation. What is instrumental motivation? Instrumental motivation means the language is instrument for a learner to get the job or to be able to tour around the world, because English is a language which has the international exposure. So, the learner would be learning English so that he can tour around, and of course for the certification purpose. In traditional English, the teacher used to emphasize on reading and writing by the student, and teacher did most of the speaking, and the listening, which was a questionable amount of understanding from the learner. In communicative method, which is presently followed, it is seen that teacher is usually there not to lecture the child, but to be there and provide the environment to the child so that he can speak more, he can listen more, he can read more, he can write more. So, that is why the communicative method has been found to be the better adopted and better suited to the English language learning.
With this note, thank you ma'am, thank you so very much for giving us this productive session. Friends, you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break, and we would be covering the other aspects of the topic. Till then, keep watching us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on teaching of global language in multilingual country, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Renu Tomar. Dr. Renu Tomar is Assistant Registrar in Guru Gobind Singh IP University, and through her we are gaining maximum knowledge. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Renu Tomar, and let's try to understand the other aspects of the topic. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Viewers, in the previous session we have talked about importance of English language. We have also talked about that whether the English language should be considered in India as a foreign language or a second language. We have also tried to explore the environmental factors as well as the learner factors with respect to learning of English language. From here we come down to the structured teaching of English language, that is teaching of English language skill. What are the goals of English language curriculum? When we talk about school education, it is twofold. First is attainment of basic proficiency, which is acquired in natural language learning. Another goal which is of language curriculum is the development of language into an instrument for abstract thinking and knowledge acquisition. From these goals, it must be clear that we have to teach English language for speaking skill, reading skill, listening skill and writing skill. And apart from that, we have to make the learner well versed with the vocabulary or the language component to such an extent that learner is able to think as well as acquire other disciplines, may it be the scientific discipline, may it be the other disciplines or the literature we can say. From this we come down to the first skill, which is listening. Listening is the first and foremost skill. Why is it foremost? This is the skill which we acquire as soon as we enter an environment where the learning begins. Listening is something which happens unknowingly, unconsciously. As soon as we are born, we are listening, and by listening we are learning. But here today we are only going to talk about listening in the learning, in the structured learning system. There are two types of listening, extensive versus intensive listening. What is extensive listening? Extensive listening means listening for, it is usually longer in duration and it is usually for pleasure, it is usually for personal reasons. We listen to news, we listen to documentaries, we listen to YouTube channel. Why do we listen? We listen for pleasure. Here we are not trying to draw some kind of information out of that. If some information is learned, that is not done consciously. In case of intensive listening, usually listening is designed by the teacher in such a manner that the learner comes out with certain output and he or she is usually evaluated on it through worksheets or through other skills. He or she might be asked to speak whatever he or she has listened. So, this way the evaluation would be taking place if the learner has been exposed to intensive learning. Now, let us talk about phases of listening. What is pre-listening? Pre-listening means it is a phase which is very important for the teacher. During this phase, teacher tries to define that what kind of objective the learner is going to achieve and the teacher is going to achieve through listening. Apart from that, here teacher also decides what the learner is going to listen to. Apart from that, in the pre-phase itself, the teacher would also introduce the listener to the activities which the learner would be conducting during while listening as well as post listening phase. And the learner would be given some information regarding the recorded message which would be played during while listening mode or activity. So, pre-listening is a phase in which the teacher provides the background to the learner and also tries to make it clear to the learner that what kind of objectives would be achieved by him or her after listening. What is while listening? While listening means that the learner would be performing certain activity while he or she is listening to the recording or some live documentary. Moreover, here the teacher's job becomes very important, because while listening, teacher would be supervising the learner. Teacher would also be seeing that the learner does not lose interest. Teacher would also be seeing that learner is doing his task properly. That is, whatever he is listening, that should come out in the form of his achievement, or in the form of the task which he is performing while listening. Then there is post listening. What is post listening? Post listening phase means that the learner would be asked certain questions based upon listening. Those questions may be in a structured form, closed ended questions, or they may be open ended form. It may be in the written form, or it may be in the spoken form. And that way the teacher would be able to evaluate that whether the listening activity has gone well or not. Let us take an example to understand listening activity. There are different kind of listening, but today we have taken an activity which is listening for direction. As you can see, there is a worksheet which says, let's go to Monica's house. To give you the background, Kavita, a friend of Monica, wants to visit Monica's home because Monica hasn't come to the school since last 6 days. But Kavita has never been to Monica's house. She is aware of the fact that Monica's house is adjacent to supermarket, and she decides to go to Monica's house after school. While going to the Monica's school, Kavita would be meeting 2 strangers and a policeman who would be helping her to find a route to Monica's house. This is the background a teacher can give to the student in pre-phase. And of course, the activity would also be shared by the teacher, which the student would be performing in while phase. Like this, the teacher would be telling the student that this particular sheet which has been given to them, while listening they will have to mark the route which Kavita takes to Monica's house on the basis of listening the recording, which is nothing but conversation between Kavita and the strangers and Kavita and the policeman. While the students would be performing this activity, teacher would get to know that whether the listening activity is going well or not. And after through with the this activity, the teacher would be asking very simple questions to the students as to understand that whether they have been able to pick up the vocabulary which they listened to in the recording. At times it may be required during while listening, the recording has to be played twice or thrice depending upon speed of the student, because the objective of the teacher in taking up this activity is to make students perform the task which has been given to them. They should be able to mark the way to Monica's house properly, and that is only possible if the students are able to listen to the recording properly. So, while recording also, the teacher will have to keep in mind that the pace of the pace of the dialogues should be such that the students would be able to pick up. Listening is an important component of English learning skill, because it is on the basis of speaking, it is on the basis of listening only that the learner would be able to pick up the other skills. In fact, it is not wrong to say that all the skills in English language are interlinked. There cannot be any speaking without listening. There cannot be any writing without reading. So, all the skills are interrelated and they have to be taken up individually as well as together, depending upon the age factor, depending upon the cognitive development of the learner. after being through with this listening, let us talk about what is speaking or oral skill. This has become very important presently. Why it has gained momentum? Because people have realized to be successful in the economic market as well as to become socially important. Speaking skill is very important, and speaking in English is very important. How would a teacher teach speaking to the learner? There are certain characteristics of effective oral skills lesson. First is simplicity of the task. By simplicity of the task, what I mean is that the task should be designed by the teacher in such a manner that the learner is able to reach his objective easily. It should neither be very difficult nor be very easy. By preparation, what I mean is that teacher should not take much time for preparing the task. This means that the teacher should be easily preparing the task, and apart from that, the time taken should also be lesser, not for the preparation of the task. Then let us talk about the tangible output or result. By tangible output, what we mean is that the output should be measurable. How would we be able to measure that whether the listening has been effective or not? This we are going to discuss further. Language practice. The teacher has to keep in mind that the speaking skill is designed for the learner, not for herself. That means the lecture by the teacher would be very less, it will be for very small time, and the learner would be speaking more. Only then we can say that the language practice is going well. Another important factor while teaching speaking is that it should be interactive. By interactive, what we mean is that the student should be able to interact individually or in groups. If the students are able to interact, then the speaking would be learnt better. Then let us talk about the interest level of the students. This is a very important factor. Teacher has to design the situation, the speaking activity or the situation in such a manner that the interest of the students is retained. How would a teacher retain the interest of the student? One, by designing the task in such a manner, the activity in such a manner that it is neither very difficult nor very easy. There should be optimal level of challenge in it. Then another important aspect, which is proper organization. It has been often seen that most of the activities or tasks fail due to lack of proper organization. By proper organization, we mean that if the speaking skill is being taught in a group, then the group should be homogeneous but having the heterogeneous factors also in it. The proper organization also means that the speaking activity should be designed in such a manner that the time taken is not neither more than the required and nor less than the required. What is role of the teacher in speaking skill? Role of a teacher can be basically divided into presentation, process, feedback, ending. What is presentation? The teacher would be presenting the task through crisp and clear instruction what is expected to be done by the students. The teacher would be presenting that the activity is being taken with the students for making them speak more. The teacher would be providing them sets of vocabulary so that the learner is able to use that vocabulary while speaking. What is The role of a teacher during process. The role of a teacher during process is that teacher should be there not as a silent spectator, but teacher should be there not as a silent spectator, but as a keen observer and participator. If needed, teacher can also become part of the group and add her inputs so that the speaking skill becomes better. If the teacher finds during the process that learners are losing interest, then the teacher has to do certain things to improve the interest of the students, like providing them some more information or providing her inputs from her sides or giving them vocabulary so that the learner are able to take up the exercise in strong manner, in integrated manner. What is the role of the teacher in ending? The role of a teacher in ending is that she has to take care of the fact that the time limit given to the speaking activity does not go beyond the allowed time, it should not exceed, nor the task be completed before the time. Feedback, this is a very important area in which teacher plays very important role. Teacher has to assess and evaluate the learner, and assessment and evaluation has to be positive. That means that teacher should always be talking about the positive sides of the learner and not just discussing the negative things or what the learner missed out while speaking. To understand further, let us take an example of a lesson plan for teaching speaking. In this lesson plan, we have taken one of a speaking activity which is in the form of a role play. The name of the lesson plan is teaching speaking and the skill focused is speaking. The material which would be used in the class would be pre-prepared text of the conversation about wedding and of course talking about customs regarding wedding clothes, party and place. Objective of the lesson is to make students or make learners to speak about the wedding using English as much as they can, and this lesson plan is designed in such a manner which would minimize teacher talking time and maximize student talking time. The teacher has to give the instruction for teaching the lesson. After the teacher has given the instruction for teaching the lesson, she would be warming up the class. By warming up the class, the teacher would be talking about the topics like wedding. She would be asking certain questions to the learners so that they are reminded of their experiences so that they feel related with the speaking task. For example, what do you think is the best age to get married? Is arranged marriage better or love marriage better? Whose wedding have you attended? Where has it taken place? Who all were attending those marriages? What food did you have? What clothes did you wear? What kind of a music was being played in the wedding? All these questions would help the teacher to warm up the class as well as make the students more participative. Apart from that, teacher would also be giving new vocabulary to the students. By giving new vocabulary means that she would be introducing words, phrases and customs which the students might not know. She would be scanning a pre-prepared text of the conversation as well as write the words the students might not know on the board. The students would be discussing the words in their groups as well as checking the words with the students. In practice, students would be made to stand in two lines facing each other because it's a role play activity. In the conversation, teacher may also stand as one of a participant if the students are not very much conversant or the students are not very comfortable. Otherwise, students can be asked to stand in two lines facing each other. There would be three kinds of practices which can be given to the students: control, semi-control and free. By control means that the students would be reading the conversation from the book which has been prepared by the teacher. This kind of an activity should be usually taken when the learners are new or very young to understand English language skill. In case of learners who understand English language or who are semi-equipped with English speaking skill, we can give them semi-control or free exposure. By semi-control means that one student in one line would close their books, they would speak, and the other would be evaluating as well as reading from the book. Free would be that all the students would close their books and asking and answering freely. After having done this practice, we would come down to the production. By production means that there would be more speaking practices. The students or the learners would be telling their partners about the last wedding they attended. They would also be sharing with the learner that what all they found interesting or what all they could have done in the wedding. Now let us talk about the timing, which is very important during planning an activity, a speaking activity. Stage 1 has been given by me 10 minutes. Stage 1 was the warm up the class. Stage 2, which was personalize the lesson, has been given 10 minutes again. Stage 3, which was pre-teach the new vocabulary, has also been given 10 minutes by me. Stage 4, which was practice, has been given 20 minutes, and the production has again been given 10 minutes. So practice as well as production in total has been given half an hour, 30 minutes. In 30 minutes speaking and 30 minutes would be the other activities which will be warming up, personalizing the lesson and pre-teaching the new vocabulary. This was one of an example of a speaking skill. Speaking skill can be designed in different manner in the different modes as well. Speaking skill activities can be defined not only just as role play. The speaking skill activities can also be as simple as asking for the introduction by the learners. It can be as complicated as asking for a report, speaking out a report on what was their experience in a function which was attended by the learner. So speaking activity can vary as per the attitude, aptitude and age of the learner, and it has to be, the teacher has to understand it and accordingly decide that what kind of activity he or she has to introduce. Now let us talk about reading. What is reading? All of us have done reading, all of us do reading. By reading, let us talk about certain objectives of the reading programs which should be clear not just to the teacher but also to the learner. First objective of reading program is to enable students to read without help. What is enabling? Enabling means the student should be able to understand, and the role of a teacher in case of reading should be minimal, and student should be able to understand as well as read on his own. That means the learner should be having knowledge about the vocabulary which he or she is reading. He or she should also be knowing the kind of a structure which has been presented to him. Like the prose require different kind of reading, poetry require different kind of reading style. So that should also be clear to the learner when he reads. Another objective which is to make learner read unfamiliar text. Unfamiliar text means that the learner should be able to read the text which he or she may not have read before, or he or she might not have access to. So unfamiliar text means enhancing vocabulary. Unfamiliar text also means that the text of his or her own choice. depending upon aptitude or interest of the learner. Then reading authentic text. By authentic text means it should be read for certain information, it should be read for particular output. By appropriate speed, what we mean is that the learner should be able to vary his or her speed as per the reading style or as per the need. Adjusting his style is something which we mean by appropriate speed. Silently, art of silent reading is something which all of us were taught as a child, and it is very important because while reading silently we are usually not wasting much of our energy, and this is something which have to be taught to the learner so that his reading improves as well as his pace also increases. With adequate understanding. With adequate understanding means that the learner would be able to understand the text which he or she is reading. Reading can be extensive as well as intensive. So, by extensive reading, what I mean is that extensive reading would be for pleasure, and intensive reading would be for the information. Depending upon that, we can say that there would be skimming or scanning. By skimming and scanning, by skimming means that the text would be skimmed through for the gist, and scanning means that the text would be scanned for particular information. It can be rapid and it can be slow depending upon the need. After having taught the reading, what we need the child to learn is writing skill. Writing skill can be structured or independent. Structured means the child would be provided with certain vocabulary as well as he or she might also be provided certain sentences. Structured can vary from providing half of the story and letting the child complete, or providing certain gaps in certain paragraph, so that the child would be able to fill up the form, fill up those gaps and accordingly write something. It can be independent, the child can be asked to write report on certain things and accordingly provide an independent and creative reaction to certain topic. Just as the other skills, there are phases to the writing: pre-writing, while writing, post-writing, and during all these phases the teacher plays a very important role, because teacher has to finally decide that what kind of writing should be going in, how the writing has to be, the writing skill has to be exposed to the student so that it becomes accessible to him and he becomes a better writer after having practiced. The teacher is responsible for the writing material as well. That means the teacher would be selecting the vocabulary, grammar and ideas. What are the objectives of the writing? The writing objectives are that learner should be able to create a structured outline for public communication. Learner should be able to mind map for content and structure. That means before writing a final draft, the learner should be able to come out with a first draft, which should be able to provide him a structure for writing for the final evaluation or final reading. It has to be clear, concise, and vocabulary has to be apt as per the situation. And of course, the role of the teacher would be to appreciate and to find out what kind of errors the student has committed and make him improve upon them.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, we believe that you might have learnt a new topic today, and you have gathered the maximum information too. So friends, if you have any queries or feedback, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. We will be meeting again very soon and would be discussing more. Today we would like to thank Dr. Renu Tomar once again for her precious inputs. Thank you, ma'am.